okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let me just share my screen. Okay, you can see my slides okay?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you, Ethan.
All right.
Well, those who are joining us, I think Ethan is a well-known personality in the ELT. He's an award-winning ELT author, and he does not need much of an introduction. But Ethan, I will let you introduce yourself to our attendees, and you can start the session right away. All the best.
Okay.
See you.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, so just to introduce myself, I'm a teacher. I work at a school, private language school in Madrid, in Spain. And I'm also an ELT author. I write course books and resource books and yeah, the kind of things you use in class with your students, basically. And one thing that I've become very interested in is something called mediation, and that I'm quite passionate about in terms of both my teaching and my materials development work. And yeah, that's what I'll be talking about today. And so mediation is still sort of a relatively new term in our field. So I'll start by just giving a brief explanation of what mediation is. And then we'll sort of quickly go on to practical applications of this concept in the classroom, basically classroom activities that you could take away and use with your students. So let's get started. So instead of giving you just a definition of mediation, I thought I would give you some specific situations, classroom situations. And in the chat box, I just want you to tell me if they're familiar to you, if you can kind of imagine those, seeing those situations in your classroom. So the first one is one student tells another student about a TV series they've watched recently, helping them to get a general idea of what it's about. So in the chat box, is that something you can picture happening in one of your classes? Francisca says definitely. Anybody else? Very familiar. Yes, Julia says very familiar. Right, I'm gonna give you a few more examples, and I'm not gonna read them out for you, but I'll just let you react to them in the chat box. Here's our second one. This familiar to you? Do you think this might happen in your classroom? Fru says this is mediation. Yes, yes, it is. Here's the third one. A student explaining something to another student. Yeah, this somebody was mentioning sort of the languages. Yeah, so this could be happening in the student's first language as well, not necessarily in English. Okay, so here's our last one. Anybody seem pretty familiar to you? Okay, so these are definitely situations that I've seen personally in my classes, and I imagine many others teachers have too. And you'll notice that they're quite different in many ways, but they have something in common, which is this idea of helping. And so if you're looking for sort of a quick, easy definition of mediation within our field, within teaching and learning a second language, we're talking about helping. Basically, communicative language activities where a student is expected to help another student in one way or another. And yeah, so that's what I'll be talking about today is basically how we can create communicative classroom activities that expect students to help each other, basically putting one or more students in a helping role. And so as you can see from those situations that we saw earlier, This could involve different ways of helping. So we could be helping people communicate better. For example, maybe overcoming one of a disagreement or conflict. And that's kind of what people traditionally think of when they think of mediation. But also there are other ways that students could be helping each other. They could be helping each other collaborate better. So for example, within a group, there could be one student who's maybe making sure that everybody's getting their fair share in terms of the time to talk and participate. And also we could have students helping other students better understand something, for example, ideas or information. And that's what I'll be talking about today. And so you may be wondering about this word mediation. I think the sort of the word itself can be a bit confusing because it has such a well-known definition outside of our field, which dates back to ancient Greece. The word mediation has been around for a very long time, and it's usually associated with sort of the resolution of disputes. Maybe commercial disputes or interpersonal disputes. However, there's in 2001, the authors of the Common European Framework of Reference, which is a very important document that's published by the Council of Europe. They sort of came up with a new definition of mediation, which is the one that I'm going to be talking about today, that includes this idea of resolving disputes, but sort of has additional sort of uses of the word as well within the context of learning and sort of speaking and using another language. And and basically in this document, they talk about how mediation means sort of helping people in different ways. They call these different ways of mediating, these different types of mediation by formal names. The first one is called mediating communication. So that's what I'll be referring to it as. And the second one is mediating concepts. And we'll talk a little bit later about why helping people collaborate better is related to mediating ideas or concepts. And the last one is mediating a text, this idea of helping people understand ideas and information, because when you think about it, when you're sort of helping somebody understand something, that information is usually contained somewhere in a text, maybe in a conversation you had, in something you read or something you watched. So basically that's mediation in a nutshell. And now we're going to move on and talk about the different types of mediation. So we're going to start with the first one, which is mediating communication. So this type of mediation, I think, is probably closer to most people's sort of traditional association with mediation. And to explain this, how it sort of works as a classroom activity, I'm going to give you an example of a situation. So we have Julia and Josh here, and Julia and Josh are having a hard time understanding each other. They're having some kind of communication breakdown, or there's a communication barrier between them. So in the chat box, I want you to tell me what would be some reasons why Julia and Josh would be having a hard time communicating or understanding each other. Any ideas? Different languages, says Ruth. Yes. Yeah, so for example, we can sort of tell by their names, they may come from different places and they may not understand each other. When people are mentioning language. Any other reasons besides language that might make it hard for them to understand each other? Yes, a cultural barrier. Yeah, so maybe there's something related to their cultures that's making it hard for them to, see something in the same way. Anything else? Yes, unfamiliarity. So maybe one person's more familiar with something than the other person, and maybe the way they're talking about it, they're maybe using words or ideas that the other person's unfamiliar with. Very good. So basically, you guys have already come up with these already, but yeah, they're sort of in the CFR, in the Common European Framework of Reference, they talk about 3 different common reasons why people have trouble understanding each other. It could have to do with language, culture, or opinions, views, or values. Sometimes people are just coming from different places and they're just having a hard time kind of meeting in the middle or seeing things in the same way. So I'm going to introduce a new person to this situation. We'll call her Maria. And Maria's going to be acting as a mediator. She's going to be helping Julia and Josh communicate better. And somebody in this role, in the mediating role, could be using various different strategies. So for example, if language is the problem, Maria might be doing some translation, right? So maybe if Josh and Julia don't share a language, maybe Maria could do a bit of translation, maybe translating words or even entire sort of phrases or sentences in order to help them understand each other. What other strategies do you think that Maria could use? Other communication strategies? In the chat box, can anybody tell me? Any ideas? Besides translation? Asking questions, very good. Very good. I think questions can be very effective, right? Yes, paraphrasing, simplifying, right? So maybe Josh explains something sort of complex and Maria kind of simplifies it a little bit, or just gives Maria the Julia sort of the general idea. Interesting. Body language, that's very interesting. Anything else? Okay, so I've got a list for you. It's not necessarily a closed list. We could add, I'm sure, some of the things that you mentioned. But somebody who's acting in the role of a mediator, sort of depending on the type of barrier, communication barrier they're trying to overcome, they might need to do some explaining. They might need to give examples, for example, to help another person understand something better. Yeah, they might be doing some summarizing, maybe listening for kind of the key information and then passing that on to the other person in order to make it easier to understand. So when we talk about mediation, oftentimes, in fact, I would argue always, we're talking about sort of communicative languages situations that activate this type of strategy that sort of require students to use this kind of strategy within the classroom activity. Okay, so this is the idea of mediating communication. So let's look at some ways that we could help students sort of develop these strategies that we're talking about and give them some practice with this. So the first one is a debate. Basically, the idea is adding a mediator to a debate, essentially, or adding a moderator to a debate and putting a student in that role. Because I think typically when we do debates with students in class, it's the teacher who's essentially moderating the debate. And if we put a student in that role, then we're giving them the opportunity to help them develop some of these strategies that we're talking about, sort of moderating, maybe summarizing key points and that kind of thing. And so the way that I've done this in class, at least, is you have sort of two students debating a topic or two teams of students debating a topic. And then you have a mediator who's sort of making sure each side has the same amount of time to talk and so on and so forth. But then there's a second stage where the mediator kind of leads a conversation about how to find some common ground between the two sides. So they're not only sort of moderating the debate, but they're sort of leading a discussion afterwards of where the two sides might be able to meet in the middle. And at this stage, we're actually giving the other students some practice with mediation as well, because we're sort of giving them the opportunity to kind of actively listen to the other side and see where they could maybe find some common ground between them. So that's one idea. Another idea is that I found is another opportunity for mediation in class is role plays. Lots of mainstream ELT course books have role plays where essentially students are in different roles and they're sort of acting out a situation. And oftentimes those situations ask students to look at things from different perspectives or even kind of debate an issue within the kind of the role play. And I find that oftentimes you can take those types of role plays you find in course books or resource books, and you can add the role of a mediator to it to give students a little bit more practice with this idea of mediation. So I've given you one here on the screen. In the chat box, can you tell me any ideas for how you could add sort of the role of a mediator to this particular debate? So in the debate, we kind of have people in favor and against, but how could we sort of add another person or another role to this? Anybody? Somebody said a judge? Yeah, so somebody could be making kind of the final decision at the end. That'd be interesting. Any other ideas? So I think there's sort of various things you could do. One possible idea is maybe taking, I'm just going to read what Donald said. Yes, yeah. But Donna mentioned the fact that you could have a moderator for this conversation, this public consultation meeting. You would think that in general, sort of in real life, somebody would kind of be in charge of the meeting, kind of deciding when it starts and finishes. And maybe that person could be in, yeah, more of a moderating role, kind of similar to the moderating role that we saw in that debate activity. Yeah, that's a nice one. I was going to say that when I did this with my students, I put the person who was the mayor as the moderator of the debate, because I was thinking, well, a mayor, as a leader, shouldn't be taking sides from the beginning and maybe hearing both sides out before making a decision. So that's another idea for adding a bit more mediation to your classes. Like the next time you're doing a role play, you can think about, is there the possibility of maybe adding a mediating role to it? So I'm going to give you one more role play activity. And it has 3 different roles with 3 different cards that you could sort of give to the individual students. So I want you to read the cards and tell me which role is the mediator in this particular role play activity. So I'll just give you a minute to read that. So I've got a couple C's in the box. Anybody disagree? Yeah, everybody's saying C. Yes, so C is definitely the mediator in this debate, in this role play. And in this particular role play, you can see where we're giving students with this idea of overcoming a language barrier as a mediator. So in this particular case, we'd have one student who is able to speak both English and their first language in the role play activity. And then we have one student who's kind of pretending to only speak their first language or only use their first language in the role play. And then we have another student who's sort of pretending to only speak English or only use English during the role play. And this might be a little bit strange to your students at the beginning because they're saying, well, why am I speaking so much of my first language in my English class? However, when you think about it, this is a very realistic way of using a second language. Basically, anybody who learns English or learns any second language is very likely to be in this situation where you're sort of going back between the 2 languages because we're sort of very often in the situation where one person maybe doesn't speak the first or second language sort of well enough to communicate properly with another person. So I've given you some ideas for that first type of mediation. So now we're going to be looking at the second type of mediating, which is mediating a text, which, as we said, was helping people better understand ideas and information. So, as I said before, the Common European Framework of Reference has kind of expanded on this idea of mediation, sort of moving it beyond just the resolution of conflicts, and also this idea of helping other people understand things better. And so you can see here where we have kind of a similar situation, but instead of Josh, we have a text. Poor Josh, he's been replaced by a text. So basically, in this case, instead of Maria helping one person understand another person better, Maria is helping one person, Julia, better understand the contents of a text. And this text could be a spoken text, it could be something she's listening to, or it could be a written text, something she reads. It could be audio-visual, sort of multimodal. It could be something she watches, or an infographic or anything like that. And then basically she's explaining it to Julia. And there's sort of various kind of real life reasons why people would be doing this kind of thing. The first one is a lack of understanding. So maybe Julia just can't understand the text because maybe it's written in a language that she doesn't understand. But just as common is this idea about the information gap. So we're often kind of explaining things to people because we have read something or we have watched something and the other person hasn't. We sort of do this every day, right? And the last one is we often mediate texts when we want to react to them or analyze them. And I think a good example is like a good book or a good movie. So after we see a good book or a good movie, we often want to talk about it, right? We want to talk about how it made us feel, or we want to sort of analyze the themes in it, maybe in more of an intellectual way. So perhaps Maria and Julia actually saw the same film, but Maria is going to be kind of mediating the text and helping Maria or sort of Julia get a better understanding of that text through this discussion of sort of how it made them feel and sort of what associations it created. So again, a very realistic way of using language. I think we can all agree. And when you think about it, this type of mediation might seem quite different from the first one, but actually in reality, you're using a lot of the same communication strategies. You might be doing some translation, depending on whether there's more than one language involved. But you might also be doing some explaining, some paraphrasing, some summarizing. You may be using many of the same strategies, in fact, that you would be the first time, which is one reason why the CFR has sort of put these different things together and called them all mediation. So this idea of mediating a text, it's been sort of a part of our teaching for a long time when you think about it. So really, anytime there's an information gap activity, which is very common in sort of course books and has been sort of a popular communicative language activity for a long time, because it gets students talking, gets them explaining things. Anytime students are doing that kind of activity in class, they're doing a mediating a text task. So students will already be familiar with this type. And they'll also be very familiar with other types of mediating a text activities. For example, giving a presentation. So when you think about it, when you give a presentation, you do some research, you do some reading, maybe you listen to podcasts, however you get your information. And then you take that information, you summarize it, or you sort of present it in a way that's going to clarify it to other people, maybe your class or maybe to an online audience, like what I'm doing right now, in fact. But the same would be true of, for example, a film review. So maybe you watch the film and then you share that information, you sort of summarize it and share your feelings or your analysis of that film with a wider group of people later. And yeah, so we've been asking students to mediate text for forever, basically. However, one thing that perhaps we're doing less with students is this idea of having them sort of read, listen, or watch something in their first language and then talk about it in English, which again is a very common activity. So I'll give you an example of a mediating a text task that I wrote for my students here in Madrid. So I want you to read the task and look at the menu over here. And tell me if you personally have found yourself in a similar situation in your country.
Ethan, excuse me, you have just 5 minutes more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so Francesca says that this happens when her parents visit her here in Spain, for example. Sounds like Francesca is also in Spain. Okay, so yeah, I think we can all agree this is a common way of using a second language. So I'm actually going to skip this activity because, as Mira said, I'm kind of running out of time. The panel discussion before went over by a few minutes. So I'm going to be finishing by talking about mediating concepts, which is this idea of putting students in a communicative situation where they're sort of expected to help each other collaborate a bit better. So with this type of mediation activity, we're essentially talking about group work. So we put students in groups and we ask them to do something. But within that group work, we're going to be expecting one student to kind of step into a helping role, maybe taking on a leadership role, for example. And when a student steps into this mediating role, this helping role within group work, they're going to be they're going to have sort of two main goals. They're going to be creating positive interaction between group members, and they're also going to be helping to other people exchange and develop ideas better. So again, this type of mediation might seem quite different from the other ones. But if you think about it, they're actually going to be using a lot of the same strategies. They might be doing some paraphrasing or summarizing. They might even be doing some translating if one student can't kind of come up with a word that they need. And they're also going to be using, maybe doing some moderating, as we saw earlier in that debate activity. That might be something that they have to do sometimes. And they might be kind of identifying key points, trying to sort of decide what's most important for the group work in order to sort of move forward. So I'm just going to give you one activity for this one so that I leave enough time for questions. So one popular activity for in terms of group work is to put students in groups and give them some questions to answer, basically. Which is fine. It gives students the ability, the opportunity to practice maybe recycling some vocabulary or just practicing their speaking skills, and that's fine. But if we want to kind of add a bit more mediation, particularly mediation of concepts to this type of activity, we could kind of designate one student as the facilitator and give them some extra questions, and basically expect them to ask the other students in the group these types of questions. Does everybody agree with this idea? Or what reasons do you have for believing that sort of? And we said before, this is kind of in pursuit of that goal of helping students sort of develop ideas and sort of think a little bit more deeply about the topic, and therefore be sort of mediating concepts while they're doing that. So let me just check the time. Yes, so I don't want to run over, but I'll just say that giving students projects to do is another nice way of giving students the sort of the opportunity to take on leadership roles within group work. So for example, if you had a project like this where the students had to make a decision about something, you could give students different roles. Maybe one person is the researcher, one person is going to present it to the rest of the class. One person maybe is taking notes on the key points, that kind of thing. And I've given you some tips here for maybe including a little bit more mediation of concepts within group work is giving a clear goal to an activity. Also maybe providing students with some useful language. We saw that earlier with that kind of list of extra questions for one of the people in the groups. Assigning roles, maybe actually assigning a student to be the group leader and organize the activity. And finally, to add a reflection stage, basically getting students to think a little bit about how well the group sort of work together as a group. So I'm going to finish there, and so this is basically mediation as defined, as I said in this document, the Common European Framework of Reference. And you can see where we're asking students to do very different things. However, we're always sort of asking them to use the same kind of group of strategies, and we're putting them in a helping role. We might be expecting them to help people understand each other better, maybe helping one person understand a text better, information, ideas. And we might also be asking students, one student within a group to take some responsibility for how well the group is working, how well things are going, and maybe finishing on time and things like that. So I'm going to finish there, but before I go, I just wanted to say that if you're interested in this idea of mediation, I've written a book about it together with a friend of mine, Riccardo Chiappini. It's published by Delta Publishing, and you could find out more information about that book by following this QR code in case you're interested. And yeah, I'll say thank you for your time, and thank you for your attention. And yeah, if there's any questions, I'm not sure, Maria, do I still have some time for questions?
Yes, we have. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So you have any questions, please feel free to write in the chat box. I will read it out to Ethan, or you want to speak directly to him, you're most welcome to open your mic and speak directly to him. So how can we apply mediation strategies in balanced way in SLA in classes to motivate students, Ethan?
Sorry, SLA, like
Yes, second language acquisition, yes.
So are we talking about university classes where students are learning about second language acquisition theory?
Yes, probably, yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, when you think about it, you could have students comparing different theories. So you could have one student kind of researching one theory and getting a good understanding of it, and then another student researching a similar theory or maybe a different take on that theory. And then they could kind of come together and share their ideas with the rest of the class and sort of debate the different sides of the issue. I think that could be an interesting way of including some mediation in that type of university setting. But I mean, really, anytime you're giving students the opportunity to, research something and then share what they found with the rest of the class or even with a wider audience, you're definitely asking them to mediate information and ideas.
So everybody's really thanking you, and they think it's a very inspiring session. Excellent work. So there are more praises than to questions. All right, we have one question, Irad. Do you want to open your mic and speak to Ethan directly, or you want to write in the chat box?
Hi. Hello.
Hi. Go ahead,
Hello.
please.
Hello, sir. My name is Errol. I just want to ask if you are using ICT's activities, or is there any ICT activities that you could recommend for us, sir?
Sorry, can you tell me what that acronym means? Are we talking about information technology or?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Something like Kahoot or any PowerPoint presentations or any activities that you can recommend.
Yeah. So I mean, I definitely was teaching mediation sort of themed classes during the pandemic. So I was using a lot of breakout rooms, for example, getting students to doing group work within breakout rooms. But yeah, I mean, I think anytime you're getting students, so for example, like if you're getting students to give a presentation, maybe they could, instead of giving it to the class directly, they could use kind of screen capture technology to sort of record themselves talking about the presentation with their slides, for example. That would be one way of including a bit more of sort of technology in this kind of thing. However, I have to say that for me, mediation is really about sort of the human connection between people, and we're trying to sort of help students develop sort of interpersonal skills. Like a lot of those strategies that we were talking about are really communication strategies. And I think that to develop those strategies, you really need to be in the same room with somebody, working out ideas together, asking questions, sort of reacting in the moment. So I do think that technology, of course, has its place in any classroom and any type of classroom activity. But I would say that mediation in particular really benefits from students maybe setting technology aside and just really getting into a discussion together and debating issues and as I said, sort of along the way, giving some students the opportunity to step into a helping role while they're doing so.
Thank you so much. That was a brilliant response to a brilliant question. All right, so if we don't have any other further questions, we will stop the session here.
Okay. Thanks, thanks everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much, Ethan. Thank you so much for joining us. We are honored to have you at our conference today.
That's my honor as well, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the day, everyone.
Bye.